right, we are at 12:16, so I'm going to get started here. I'm glad that so many of you could join us today for this fascinating mountain talk with Jill McDermott, who is the director of Lehigh Oceans. The Lehi Oceans Research Center was started just in the spring of 2024, so it's brand new. It's a hub for collaborative oceanographic. Is that right? Am I saying that right? Oceanographic research, understanding and predicting how biological systems respond to environmental changes from the surface to the deep sea. So this is, Jill, you've been at Lehigh did you just get here in the spring?
No, I've worked here since 2016.
2016, okay. Before that, Jill earned her BA from Dartmouth College in chemistry. She got a Master's of Science in Geochemical Systems from the University of New Hampshire and a PhD in Chemical Oceanography from MIT and the Woods Hole Oceanography, I really can't say that word, Institution Joint Program. So just a little bit about, before we get started with Jill, a little bit about the webinar if you have not been on these before. Jill will talk to us about the topic for 15-20 minutes, and then we'll open it up to your questions. The way you will ask those questions is through the chat function, probably at the bottom of your screen, so just open that up. It's always more fun if you ask your questions to everyone instead of just the host and the presenters. Sometimes that starts a back channel of dialogue that can be really interesting. So I also have to tell you, we are recording this. If you have to drop off early or if you find it fascinating and want to share it with your friends, we will be posting this on our YouTube channel in a few days after we get it edited and ready for that. Okay, so let's get started. Jill, take it away.
Thanks, Jennifer. Yeah, so as Jennifer said, my name's Jill McDermott. I'm an associate professor at Lehigh in the Earth and Environmental Sciences Department. I'm also director of Lehigh Oceans. So the goal of my talk today is to introduce you to our new center, just started this past January, so it's a very exciting time for us. We study oceans all around the world, and I want to share with you some of the projects that our researchers are doing within Lehigh Oceans. And so because we work globally, we can really work from anywhere. You don't really need to live on a coast to have a vibrant marine science program. So that's what we brought to Lehigh. The central theme of our work is to understand and predict how biological systems will respond to environmental change from the surface to the deep sea. And so we work with undergrad students, grad students, postdocs, and technicians to produce cutting-edge science while also training the next generation of marine researchers. What I'm showing here is an image of our planet. And so what you can appreciate here, in some sense, the name Earth is a misnomer for our planet. A more accurate name might be ocean, because 70% of the Earth's surface is covered by the ocean. If you take that all together, all of that water accumulated, the total volume of our oceans would occupy a sphere about 40% the size of the moon. So that's a large volume of water. And so that volume of water makes up 99% of the habitable space on our planet. If you break up the ocean by depth, which I've done here, you can see that the vast majority of the ocean consists of the royal blue squares, the deep sea. I define the deep sea here as water depths greater than 200 meters. You may be more familiar with interacting with the sunlit ocean, the shallow ocean. Organisms that live in the shallow ocean are vital to making our planet habitable because they generate half of the oxygen we breathe. Every second breath you take contains oxygen that was generated in the ocean. However, most of the ocean exists far beyond what we can see in complete darkness. And so that's the watery, high pressure, pitch dark world that encompasses our largest biome on the planet. It's important because it may have played a role in the origin and sustenance of life over billions of years. And this is the environment that we study with Lehigh Oceans. The center is comprised of 4 faculty in our labs. I'll briefly introduce you to them. So first off is myself. I'm a marine chemist. I specialize in studying the flows of energy and the building blocks for life in hot springs at the seafloor. These are places where there's a shallow volcano that interacts with seawater. Our other faculty members include Santiago Herrera, who studies the ecology and evolution of deep sea animals that live in vulnerable environments. We also have Professor Mike Layden, who researches the nervous system of anemones as a model for understanding how cnidarian animals respond to environmental change. And then we also have JP Belmonte. JP is a microbiologist and biogeochemist who specializes in studying natural microbial populations. JP tracks how those microbes respond to environmental change, and he works in particular in the Arctic and in the deep sea. He's interested in how those changes influence the flow of carbon, which has significance to ongoing climate change. Our center also includes 5 postdocs and staff, 12 PhD students, and 10 undergraduate student researchers. We really strive to provide a lot of opportunity for our early career team members who are able to sail on ships, dive in submarines, lead robotic missions, and learn many analytical techniques in our labs. So these are 2 overarching questions that I will discuss today. First, what factors drive biodiversity in the deep sea? And how do we actually measure it? Then second, how does environmental change, whether it's natural change or changes brought on by people, how do those changes affect marine biodiversity? So first, a video to introduce you to this environment. Get it to work. There we go. So our work benefits society while advancing our understanding of the deep ocean. This video was created by the Schmidt Ocean Institute, one of our funding partners, and it showcases one of the systems that we study at Lehi Oceans. These are deep sea coral ecosystems, and they host a diversity of life that is comparable to shallow water coral reefs. That includes species that are commercially valuable, like fish. And this environment is very cold, temperature of about 2 to 3 degrees, and there's not much food. And so all of these animals grow very slowly. Deep sea corals, like you're seeing here, and sponges hold a record for the oldest animals on the planet, with the oldest being dated to up to 10,000 years old. And so that makes organisms like these very susceptible to damage by human activity. And that can include rising temperatures due to climate change, as well as damage from fishing nets and pollution. The work that we're doing helps inform the management and the protection of these kinds of delicate ecosystems. We partner with national marine sanctuaries to inform policy and propose new protected areas, such as this video that you're seeing here, which is a newly proposed protected area in Costa Rica. So far, our team has described at least 10 new species in this area that have never been seen before, including 1 new family of corals in the Tree of Life. So what we'll switch to now is the very deep sea. This is video collected at 2,500 meters on my recent expedition in 2024. I was the lead of this cruise. Working in the deep sea is high risk and high reward. This footage was all collected by the deep submergence vehicle Alvin. We were working at the East Pacific Rise, just west of Costa Rica, on a project that's supported by the National Science Foundation, another one of our funding sources. Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution operates the Alvin, and it owns the copyright for this video. It was edited by May Lubetkin. And what you can see here is the advanced technology that we use to access the deep sea. We use this on all of these expeditions to collect specimens and make observations. We always use deep submergence technology, like the human-occupied vehicle that you see here, as well as remotely operated and autonomous vehicles. The ocean is a very harsh place. It's corrosive because it's high salinity, completely dark, the darkest dark you'll ever see. And so to see anything in this environment requires light and power. It's also high pressure due to the great depths that we're working at. This video is about 250 times the atmospheric pressure you feel right now. And therefore, we have to use scientific tools that were carefully engineered and pressure tested for safety. And so you're getting a glimpse of the environment that I specialize in. I study the chemistry of these super hot deep sea hydrothermal vent fluids. These are formed when cold seawater downwells through cracks in volcanic parts of the seafloor. And then heat from the volcano causes the water to chemically react with the rock around it, creating this superheated water that is transformed into gas and metal-rich fluids like this one that can support life in these environments. The systems are important because they can deliver nutrients in the form of metals to natural ecosystems, which I'll tell you more about later, And then here you can see the recovery of the vehicle. Okay, let's go on. All right. So one of our projects at Lehi Oceans seeks to address the observation that both global change and human activity are changing the timing of coral spawning. In the top figure, the gray bars show the spawning times that occurred during the 1980s. This is a paper published in Science in 2019. You can see that these events occur during specific times in the lunar cycle. Now take a look at the colored lines. Those colored lines are observations of spawning 30 years later during the 2010s. And those color line data encompass about 20 species of corals. Spawning has clearly been dysregulated. It's no longer following these predictable patterns. And in addition, the reproductive success of that spawning is extremely reduced, and it limits the adaptability of corals to changing climate. The researchers working on these questions propose that this change in spawning may be due to light pollution in coastal areas. LED lights, for example, penetrate more deeply into the ocean because they generate so much blue light. It's also thought that higher global temperatures driven by rising greenhouse gas emissions are impacting coral spawning as well. And so here at Lehigh, our researchers are investigating the molecular pathways associated with light in a model cnidarian, which you can see in this video. This is called the Nematostella. It's a genus of anemone. This team seeks to pinpoint the cellular biology that is activated by changes in light, and that's what's shown in the rightmost view. Examining the molecular mechanisms of this fundamental biological process can then be used to address evolutionary and ecological questions. It can also tell us how to correct human behaviors that are starting to exacerbate some of the negative effects that we see on coral ecosystems. We're also leaders in the application of a new tool to examine marine biodiversity in the natural environment. This new tool is called environmental DNA. In the past decade, the collection and identification of environmental DNA, or eDNA for short, has become a tool for measuring biodiversity in bodies of water. The tool started in fresh water. So you can think of it like applying forensic science to droplets of water. Here at Lehigh, we investigated the influence of several environmental factors, including temperature, pH, and dissolved oxygen concentration on the degradation rate of coral eDNA in seawater. To summarize what we found, eDNA in the ocean degrades at a rate that is predictable based on temperature alone. That finding is important because temperature is a simple factor to measure, and now temperature can tell us how far away all those particles of organisms might move before the eDNA degrades and cannot be measured. That's important for using eDNA as a tool in conservation biology. I'm going to next talk about another tool we're applying to characterize biodiversity. It's difficult to count marine species. Most of them are tiny, a lot of them are hard to see, and therefore they're hard to sample, and we don't know much about them. And so here at Lehigh, we're participating in the Global ARMS project, which is led by the Smithsonian. The word ARMS is an acronym that stands for Autonomous Reef Monitoring Structures, and you can see one in the lower left corner of the slide. The goal is to standardize the assessment of marine biodiversity and monitor it as changes occur in the ocean. And so an ARMS is a colonization platform that helps us sample the hidden diversity, those tiny little organisms that we otherwise might miss. ARMS have been primarily used within shallow coral reefs as a method to document the recruitment of seafloor communities. And our goal is to test ARMS in much deeper environments in volcanically active parts of the seafloor at hydrothermal vents. So you can see a picture here of one of our ARMS colonization platforms that was deployed at the East Pacific Rise in 2021. And so our goal is to try to understand what is the benthic biodiversity before a seafloor eruption. And we forecast that the next eruption in this environment will occur in early 2025. Now I'll show you what we recovered from the ARMS in 2024. So here's a snapshot of that work. We were able to collect about 300 individuals belonging to 28 different species. and that includes 10 species that we often don't see visually in the area. We then redeployed the cleaned arms with the goal to measure recruitment in the next cycle after the next eruption. And so our next cruise there will be in early 2025. Okay. And I next want to describe our newest project. The setting of this project is Vulu SE Mount, which is an active underwater volcano located in American Samoa. It's part of the American Samoa National Marine Sanctuary. And so this is the schematic showing the Vulu SE Mount over on the far right. It hosts vigorous hydrothermal activity, like you saw in my earlier video. Those metal-rich fluids can rise buoyantly up through the water column. They can then fertilize the overlying ocean by injecting iron. And so those natural chemical nutrients sourced from warm, buoyant plumes might stimulate the growth of what we call the primary producers, the marine plants in the ecosystem. That process would trap carbon in those marine plants, thereby increasing the sequestration of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And so this study would carry significant implications for removing carbon dioxide. But in order to understand how important this is, we need to know how much iron makes it to the surface. How much extra carbon does this natural system trap compared to the regular ambient Western Pacific? If we can answer those questions, then we're one step closer to a potential geoengineering solution to help combat ongoing climate change. We also propose that the enhanced productivity or growth of marine plants might also then rain down as food particles and support abundant and diverse communities of animals at all depths along the volcano's flanks. And so we expect that this volcano may host more biodiversity than neighboring volcanoes that are inactive. I next have a video to show you what the seafloor looks like in this place. So here you have it. Samoa is analogous to Hawaii, which is another chain of volcanic islands that form above a hotspot volcano. And this marine sanctuary is the largest and most remote in the United States. The seamount rises from the abyssal plain to about 600 meters below the sea surface, and much of its emitted hydrothermal plume can reach the upper water column. And so here you can see a visualization of a seafloor map. This is showing you the active caldera of that underwater volcano. And here you can see a sonar survey. It looks like a slice through the water. And these vents are also gas rich, so they're creating a plume of bubbles, which can be detected by the sonar. So you can actually visually see the ascent of the plume from the volcanic caldera. And so we have a cruise sailing this fall to this volcano. It will lead a biodiversity monitoring using environmental DNA and collecting water samples to measure metal chemistry. We are aiming to establish this site for a place to do long-term integrative studies in marine ecology and biogeochemistry. You can follow along on the cruise. There's a QR code over on the right side at the Nautilus Live website. You can actually see live video footage from the seafloor. If you follow along, the cruise will sail on September 1st, 2024. Okay, on then. All right, and so the next two slides describe our vision for growth in the center. So like I've just described to you, we have a lot of strength in biodiversity monitoring using tools like environmental DNA and the ARMS monitoring systems. We also have a lot of strength in understanding reproduction and regeneration and microbial responses to change, as well as tracking natural hydrothermal sources of vital micronutrients in marine systems. Our center will host symposia starting with this summer. We're hosting an international symposium in Cnidarian biology here at Lehigh. We're also sponsoring student-driven research grants. Over the long term, we'll also acquire and maintain advanced instrumentation that can be used in the deep sea, as well as developing and testing innovative new ways to use methods and tools. We aim to enhance access to the sea for our center researchers so that we can get more early career researchers out to sea. And we also aim to grow our team of dedicated research staff and students. And then finally, I wanted to describe another key component of our center, which is providing our students with tangible skills that translate to good jobs. What I show here on this slide is some of our alumni who have researched ocean science here at Lehigh. Our current students are earning fellowships from the NSF and the Smithsonian, and our alumni have gone on to pursue many diverse career paths post-Lehigh. You can see that they're doing further education in pursuing master's and PhD programs. They're also doing professional careers in environmental and financial consulting, in public health, engineering and data analytics, and medical research, as well as federal research. And so in my last slide, I'd like to thank our funding sources, share our contact information with you. Here's my email, and we have an Instagram account, Lehi Oceans. I really wanted to also thank you for your time today, and I'm happy to take your questions.
Fantastic. Those videos are phenomenal. Wow.
Thanks.
Yeah, they almost look fake. They're so great. They're so crisp and amazing. Thank you for that. We do have a couple of questions. Guy is asking, how many undiscovered organisms do you think there are in the ocean?
Oof, that's a very good question. Thousands is the short answer. There are, on almost every expedition, particularly if it's to a new area, we ultimately identify new species that are unknown to humankind. And the vast majority of unknown species are located in the deep sea, because like I told you earlier, it's the biggest habitable volume of space on our planet. And it's also the hardest to get to because of all of the technological challenges like you've just been able to see. And so there are very many thousands of unknown species still to be discovered in the deep sea.
Have you discovered one that you've gotten to name?
I have not yet, although I'm a marine chemist, so nor have I discovered a new molecule. That would be really great, though.
Yeah.
I have not named any, but actually our professor Santiago Herrera did document a new coral species that he was able to name himself.
Cool.
So at least one new species by our team members.
Nice. Guy says, I was reading something about using eDNA to track overfishing in Palau. What was that all about and how does it work?
I'm not familiar with that study, but let me go back to my eDNA slide and I'll tell you a little more about it. Oh, there we go. Okay. So here you can see a schematic that describes how eDNA is used in an aqueous environment, a water-rich environment. So here's a little droplet of water, and it contains all of these materials that are shed by a living organism. So that can include things like cells, skin and scales, free DNA, microbial scales, as well as metabolic waste. And you can also kind of think of it like forensic science. Like, so here in this room, there's a lot of little bits of gel everywhere, right? So anywhere we're like working and living, we're gonna shed traces of our bodies. This is also true in a water environment. So fish, getting back to your question, fish shed a lot of materials as well, like scales and skin. They also make slimes, mucus. So all of that can get mixed up in the seawater itself. So eDNA is this new tool where you can actually collect water, filter the water in a sterile way onto a filter, do a DNA extraction, and then amplify or increase the number of DNA strands through qPCR to quantify the actual amount of DNA in the material. What you can then do is apply something called a primer that can identify which organism produced that DNA, whether it was a fish, an invertebrate organism like a coral, or some other type of organism like a microbe. And so it's a quantitative tool that we can use to identify at a species level which fish are present in an environment or what corals are present in an environment without actually sampling the fish or the coral, but instead filtering water. So it's very cost effective, and it can we can really greatly expand our coverage and our understanding of marine biodiversity applied to many different groups of marine organisms, including fish that are commercially important.
I'm going to jump down to Jeremy's question because it tracks with some of the science that you're talking about, and then I'll get to some of the other questions. Jeremy asks, you mentioned this briefly, but is deep ocean storage of atmospheric carbon dioxide feasible? And if so, does that solution have potential negative impacts to the ecosystems where you work?
That's a great question. So the feasibility question is really an engineering question, right? In terms of the science, there are a couple different ways that researchers are considering geoengineering solutions for carbon storage in the marine environment. So the one I touched on in my talk is what we call ocean fertilization. So it's the idea that life in the ocean is limited by a nutrient. Any life anywhere has limits. And in the ocean, those nutrients can include things like iron, which is a trace micronutrient, or also things like phosphorus or nitrogen. So if you do your research and you identify which nutrient is limiting, then in theory, you could add that nutrient to the surface ocean and increase the growth of marine life. The reason that potentially can trap carbon is all life is mostly comprised of carbon by mass. And so when that life then makes its way to the sea floor, either through metabolic waste or dying and sinking, that carbon that was trapped in biomass can then be transferred to the marine sediments and then kept away from the atmosphere over geologic time, right? At least until those sediments are later subducted. And so that's one mechanism for trapping carbon through a geoengineering strategy of fertilization. Certainly, that would have to be very carefully assessed. And so one of the reasons we're interested in researching Vulu is it's one of the rare environments where there's this natural process that can inject iron up into the surface ocean. Usually iron comes down from dust particles that settle into the ocean. And so when you're really far from shore, iron is very limiting. This is a kind of an unusual place where you actually get injection up of iron. And so we're very interested in understanding when you have this kind of consistent source or pulse of really high iron, how much carbon does it really trap, right? And that's going to tell us a lot about whether or not geoengineering using that mechanism may or may not work, right? And like how much iron should be applied? What could we predict will happen based on this natural system? There are other lines of research that I'm not an expert on, but that look into more like geologic carbon sequestration. So this would be the injection of carbon-rich fluids or gases into rock substrate. So in like deep into the seafloor, for example, to try to trap it within the rock itself. And so again, that's it's a geologic question as well as an engineering one. And that's not something I'm an expert in, but it's something that's in review, right? For feasibility.
So that leads beautifully into Emily's question. Is there or will there be any crossover within the center with environmental engineering or other types of engineering fields here at Lehigh?
Yeah, I mean, projecting forward, we would love to partner with some of our engineering colleagues. We have mechanical engineers, for example, who work on building robotic marine diving robotic vehicles, I would say. We also have a large marine energy consortium that's working on harnessing marine sources of energy, which is kind of interesting to us because all of the tools that you see here require things like batteries and power. And so if we can actually harness in situ marine energy, we can potentially make longer or more, kind of more spatially spread out measurements. And so enhancements in power are always helpful. The other type of collaboration I can see developing is opportunities for high pressure experimentation. We have a lot of material scientists, for example, who synthesize materials at high pressures, and they have the right types of labs where we could actually simulate high pressures that we experience in the marine environment and then build new hypotheses based on experiments.
So you've kind of talked around this question, but I'll ask to make sure that you answered it the way Susanna asked it. But Susanna's a parent of a Lehigh student, so thank you, Susanna, for tuning in. She says, hello from the Indian Ocean. Will you include research on marine-based engineering solutions in renewable energy, for example, or mainly biology?
Great question. Thanks for asking that. Yeah, we actually have another group at Lehigh that's working on marine energy questions, and they're based in mechanical engineering. And so you should check out that group. It's already been funded and it's very active in marine energy. In Lehi Oceans right now, we're based in the College of Arts and Sciences. And so what I highlighted today was a lot of our biology. 3 of our center faculty are biologists, hence that focus. And then I'm a chemist, although I didn't describe a lot of the chemistry today. Happy to take questions about it, but I stuck with biology today.
Okay. Stanley's asking, wondering why and how Lehigh decided to go into this research area.
Sure. Yeah, so we touched on at the beginning of the talk, I've worked at Lehigh since 2016. And Lehigh is not a traditionally marine science school, right? I knew that, I could see that. But I joined Lehigh because I could see how much I could impact students here. When you have an absence of something, you can have that much more impact. And so because we really work all around the world, we don't have a geographic limitation to where we can have a marine science program. And so a lot of what Lehigh was attractive to me because I could see how that could make marine science successful. It's a warm and welcoming place. There's terrific students. We have a lot of support for involving those students in our research. And so central to what we have to do here is we need like people, right? Dedicated, hardworking people who are going to solve problems and really put the time in. And so Lee has been a great place to foster those interactions, even though it wasn't traditionally an ocean place. I've really enjoyed my career here so far. I'm also very excited about the opportunity for cross-college collaborations, like with engineering that we were just talking about, because Lehigh is traditionally a very strong engineering school. And so we can tap into that in the future.
And I hear that a lot, especially from professors who just joined Lehigh in the last 8 to 10 years. Just that cross collaboration is pretty, not super rare, but it's really dynamic here at Lehigh. So, so I want to ask Jeff Sherman's question. Hi, Jeff. He says, wonderful presentation. How far down does the Alvin go? Can it handle something as deep as the Mariana Trench? It's amazing that organisms can exist under great pressure and no sunlight.
Thanks for that question. I'm actually on the National Committee of Advisors for the Alvin and other deep submergence assets in the United States. And so Alvin was recently upgraded to dive to a maximum depth of 6,500 meters, which is most of the seafloor, but does not include the trenches. And so anything deeper than 6,500 is out of reach for Alvin. We do have other tools and like benthic landers, for example, that can dive deeper than that. But currently Alvin is depth limited to 6,500. The reason for that is mainly, it's an engineering reason, but it's things like life support, buoyancy, weight, and battery life, right? So a really deep dive also takes more time. And so because Alvin carries people, we have, naturally there are limits on how quickly and how much work we can do when we're diving very deep. But I am really excited about the upgrade because it means that we can now access over 95% of the seafloor.
How long are you down there at a time?
A typical dive is about 8 hours from when they close the hatch to when you open the hatch again. I've dove 12 times in my life so far, and I have 2 more Alvin cruises that I'm leading in 2025. So I'm adding to that quickly. Nice. We spent, where we dive lately, the descent is about an hour. So we get about 6 hours on bottom before we ascend again for about an hour, where we're picked up by the ship and then we eat dinner on board. So we dive every day once we're on station. Wow,
that's so cool. Michael's question, well, back to the what you were talking about with iron and the Samoa there. While iron may be beneficial to the storage and capture of nutrients, do you see microplastics, which have been introduced into the oceans, as beneficial, detrimental, or neutral in your research?
Thanks for that question. I don't study microplastics explicitly, so I can't speak to it personally, but I do know that in general, microplastics are an environmental concern. They are an important thing to study, but it's also kind of a challenge to study because, as I'm sure everybody's familiar with, plastics are pervasive. There's plastic scattered everywhere. And so in order to study microplastics, you have to have a very specialized environment that's plastic free. And that also extends to the ship environment where you're collecting the samples. And so we have not, we've had some undergraduate students interested in microplastics. So they've done some analyses of some of our samples to look for them, but we haven't been able to conclusively show that those microplastics were derived in situ in the natural environment and not like a product of contamination. So it's not a field of research that we're active in right now, but it is a really important one that others are working in.
Okay. Michael has a comment about that. The phthalates that leach out of microplastics have a negative impact on nervous system function, development, and regeneration. Where they are abundant, there are noticeable impacts on organismal health. While it's unclear at what concentration are microplastics leaching enough phthalates that it starts to impact life. So is anybody studying that if they wanted more information at Lehigh or in other?
I would talk with the molecular biologist, so either Mike Layden or Santiago, but we don't have a chemistry person working on phthalates in seawater.
Okay.
I'm the chemist, guilty as charged, but I've been working more on naturally generated chemicals. So materials like iron or salts or gases.
Right. Let's see. Cunit says, thank you for the great talk. I was wondering if there's a complex system modeling of the environment of the oceans. Would you happen to know how far the research on that might have developed?
Oh gosh, it depends on which system. But yeah, that's a really insightful question. And I think where this is coming from is, each one of us can kind of feel a little siloed in our disciplines, right? Like my knowledge runs it's deep, but it's not necessarily all that broad. So like I personally don't model systems at systems level, but I produce data that could then be input into a systems-based model, right? And so that's its own discipline in itself, types of like marine modeling that you're describing. So right now we don't have a modeler working at Lehigh that specializes in marine modeling. It would be a really great type of faculty member to work with in the future, though. Somebody that could pull in a lot of observations that we make that are like cross-disciplinary. So like you've heard today, within our center, we have biologists, microbiologists, and chemists. But the next step to generating data like that is, all right, so let's make microbiology, biology, and chemical evaluations in one system. Now let's also measure things like water transport in that system. We can then generate things like numerical models to describe how things may be moving in this dynamic three-dimensional space. And so we haven't worked on that yet explicitly, but that's a place that we could go in the future.
Okay, Charles is asking, some years ago, maybe 10 or so, Lehigh had a relationship with an ocean research institute and ocean-going vessel in Bermuda. I think it's now associated with another university. Do you know anything about that?
Sure. Yeah. So we've had partnerships with the BIOS lab. I think that's what you're referring to, the Bermuda Institute of Ocean Sciences. And that partnership's long running. We send a lot of Lehigh students to do studies in Bermuda. One of my own undergrad researchers who worked in my group also did some work in Bermuda. So she had worked in a glider lab there where she was deploying gliders. And then she came on to do an honors thesis with me. And I've been out to BIOS. I actually just have a new grant funded to work with 2 BIOS researchers who are now partnered with Arizona State University. And so that's their new university partner. Getting back to your question, they just generated a new School of Ocean Sciences at Arizona State. And so they are now official partners, but they're also partners of Lehigh. So we're actually starting to formalize our own connections with Arizona State and BIOS.
Which further proves your point that marine biology studies can be done anywhere, even in the desert.
Yeah, exactly. I know.
I had a couple more questions here. Several people saying this is a great presentation. Thank you. This is keep up the collaborations. Emily is asking, where is your office located on campus if they have more questions once the fall semester starts? All right, where?
Sure. Yeah, I can tell you, I work in the Earth and Environmental Sciences department, and we're housed in the STEPS building, which is on the lower campus. It's close to McGinnis. And my lab and my office are on the second floor of STEPS. And we also have our main office in STEPS 109, where if you want to find a faculty member, you might want to start there. We have office staff in there that can point you in the right direction.
Okay, fantastic. And then the last question is more of a personal one from Min Jong. What is the most interesting place that you have visited for your research?
Most interesting place? Oh my gosh, that's a difficult question. Man. Every time I see the seafloor, it's interesting. I mean, I think the most impactful dive was my very first dive in Alvin. I can tell you what dive was like. So I was 22 years old. I had just started my master's degree. I had graduated from my undergrad 1 week earlier, and the volcano we were studying had just erupted. It was like fate, right? And so my researcher that I was working with needed to hire a large team of people to study the new eruption. And so I was hired, and I met her in the airport in Houston. I had never met her before. And we were on our way to Mexico and sailing from Mexico to dive with Alvin, which is the same Alvin we still use, to this very dynamic place that has an eruption about every 15 years. And so my first dive was, I was able to dive that year myself, the first time. And although the videos are gorgeous, like what I was able to share with you today is very powerful, it just doesn't replace being there in person, right? And so when I was able to dive in person, I just had it was just like changed my life completely, right? To be able to actually see how quickly the water is moving through the system, that was something I couldn't really imagine. And I also kind of thought the ocean was flat, like it looks like kind of like a bathtub in maps, just looks smooth and kind of featureless. That's not the case. There are huge lavas that are like the size of like my car, right? And they're puffy. And so there's a lot of like very chaotic looking structure in the seafloor. So it's really not a flat, simple place in any way. And so to be able to go there and actually see what the complexity of that environment was like really got me excited about understanding it more thoroughly, right? And so that's what really drove me to keep pursuing graduate school in this field. And that's what really motivates me here at Lehigh. I love to teach. I really value that part of my effort, but I think my teaching is really enhanced by the type of research that I do because I'm that much more integrated into new knowledge and new discoveries. And so those first dives it was amazing. The lava was also brand new, so it was iridescent. It's this rainbow iridescent color that only persists for a few months because then it starts to weather to a white color, like a clay kind of color. And so it's very rare to see that kind of rainbow luminescence to the lava. So that was my very first dive. I had no benchmark for what I was seeing, right? And so I've actually never seen anything like that since then. And
That's
that was
fantastic.
like, that was my very first experience on bottom. So
Wow.
it really changed my life. And so that's really what I'm bringing to students here at Lehigh. We're able to, on my last expedition, we had 8 new divers that got to go down to see the seafloor.
Wow. Very cool. Well, I really appreciate this presentation. I think people listening did too, based on the chat here, and your ability to take what is a very complex and new to a lot of us, all these different concepts and make them easy for us to understand. And those videos again are just amazing. So I really thank you, Jill McDermott, for joining us today. And everyone will send out the recording and some other information so that you can watch watch Alvin's next, I think you said in November or September 1st.
Yep,
Alvin's
September
going out again.
1st. Yeah,
Okay.
that'll be a remotely operated vehicle called Hercules, but it's
Hercules.
tethered through a fiber optic. So you'll actually be able to see what Hercules is seeing in real time.
Very cool. We'll send that out on September 1st as well, so that people can see that. So thank you again, and thanks everyone for joining us.
Thanks, everybody.